I've done a lot of videos about robodebt. It's not a popular topic, but I think it deserves as much attention as it can get. So here is another one to go through the costs of robodebt and the Royal Commission, and at the end, an update on the National Anti-Corruption Commission's decision not to investigate robodebt. Let's start with costs, and the Royal Commission report goes through this in heaps of detail. The coalition, when they created robodebt, estimated it would save $4.7 billion. It instead wasted billions in public funds. The government spent almost $1 billion just to run the scheme, and the actual figure is likely much higher than that. And for all that money spent, they had to then write off $1.75 billion of unlawful debts that had been raised. $746 million of this had already been collected and so needed to be refunded back to all the Australians they effectively stole money from. The Royal Commission itself was a costly exercise, although compared to the Robodebt scheme, the cost was tiny. And unlike the Robodebt scheme, it provided a valuable insight into how so many government departments and politicians failed to act with integrity. So how much did the commission cost? According to Alan Tudge, who was a minister responsible for robodebt, it was $200 million. He put this in an article he wrote to try and defend himself after a disaster appearance as a witness and his subsequent resignation from Parliament. That article, by the way, is begging for a fact check, so if that's something that would interest you, let me know in the comments. It's no surprise that the $200 million number was completely made up, and luckily, the Royal Commission report gives us the actual costs. When the commission was announced, it was given a budget of $30 million, and then a further $3.6 million was allocated later on, so the total cost was $33.6 million. There's another angle to this which I found more interesting. Some Liberal Party politicians who appeared at the Royal Commission were given public funding for their legal expenses. This is a perk that's available to politicians in the event they get into legal trouble and need to hire super expensive barristers using our money. Take Scott Morrison as an example. Here is a bunch of documents released under FOI that I wanted to share. After the Royal Commission was established, Scott Morrison wrote this letter to the new government's Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus. Dear Attorney General, I am writing to apply for legal assistance. Isn't that nice? The poor guy needs some help, unlike the victims of his scheme that would have loved some more legal assistance to fight off unlawful and life-changing debts. Anyway, because he was the Minister for Social Services, the Treasurer, and then Prime Minister throughout the life of the scheme, he was eligible for this public funding. The Attorney General wrote back and confirmed that the government would cover his costs of obtaining legal representation in relation to all aspects of the Royal Commission. So how much money are we talking about here? Well, we didn't know because this information isn't something that is normally disclosed. All that's required is for the Attorney General to flag to Parliament that an approval for assistance had been given, and this happened in October 2022. But then, about 6 months later, this happened during Senate estimates.
In relation to funding of legal assistance provided to ministers for the period since the election of the current government under the Parliamentary Business Resources Regulation 2017, if I can ask some questions in that regard.
Yes.
But I'm interested to know how many applications have actually been made for funding since the election of the existing government under that regulation in terms of legal expenses.
Thank you, Senator. So in the current financial year since 1st July 2022, there have been 23 approvals of legal assistance under the Parliamentary Business Resources Regulations for current or former ministers.
Okay, 23 approvals.
23. Just to be clear, Senator, you're asking for the amounts paid with respect to the approvals that have been approved in that time frame.
Correct. So I'm not seeking to go before.
Just there could have been some payments recently with respect to previous approvals.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the current government. Yep. Okay, thank you.
This is Senator Paul Scar, and he's a Liberal National Party member. I'm not sure what he was trying to find with this question, maybe some sneaky legal assistance that the Labor government had provided, but it backfired. The department provided a detailed breakdown of legal assistance it had provided to various politicians as at 24 May 2023. For the Royal Commission into Robodebt, coalition politicians claimed over $2 million in legal expenses from public money. And at this point, the Royal Commission was still going, so the real number is much higher. Scott Morrison claimed almost $500,000. Christian Porter, $795,000. Maurice Payne, $240,000. Stuart Robert, $180,000. Michael Keenan, $500,000. And it goes on. Again, the final numbers are likely to be much higher. The regulations that allow for these claims are in place so that legal expenses incurred by ministers in the course of their work are covered. But how is it reasonable for a single person to rack up $500,000 or more of legal fees and then charge that to us? This is a bit of a tangent, but the Commonwealth Government provides some funding to Victoria Legal Aid, which is a body that helps people if they need legal assistance and can't afford it. They were the ones that took the government to court and got Robodebt shut down. When you average out the federal funding given to Victoria Legal Aid at the time Robodebt was introduced, across the tens of thousands of people they provided lawyers to that year, the average amount provided per person comes to around $500. So the average person gets $500 of legal assistance when fighting Robodebt, but the people who came up with the scheme, well, they get 1,000 times more funding. Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, as I mentioned, we don't have final figures for this legal assistance, and it's no surprise that this senator didn't ask the question again. So the Royal Commission cost quite a bit of money, but it was nowhere near the cost of the scheme itself, and that's not even counting the human toll, which hasn't been and can't be calculated. Keep this in mind the next time someone complains about money being wasted by Labor setting up the Royal Commission. I also have another video I'm working on that will go through the recommendations of the Royal Commission and the government's response, including them pretending that one of the recommendations didn't exist, so that will come out at some point. But I did want to go through one final thing in this video. I previously covered the fact that the NAC refused to pursue Robodebt. You can watch that video for more information. I'll put a link in the description. This was despite the fact that the Royal Commissioner, who was a senior retired judge, thought it was necessary to delay the release of her report so that the NAC was up and running to make the referral. This decision caused a fair amount of outcry, and it resulted in around 900 complaints made to the inspector of the NAC. The inspector is an independent person whose job it is to keep an eye on the NAC and has the power to conduct investigations into the NAC if they deem necessary. In June 2024, the inspector announced that she would inquire into the NAC's decision not to investigate the Royal Commission's referrals. I'll keep an eye on this and likely do a video on the results of this inquiry when it's released. One thing I'll note is that a lot of the complaints were apparently saying that the NAC was corrupt. I don't think this is the case. I just think they didn't give appropriate weight to the Commissioner's views. It's not reasonable to expect the NAC to redo a bunch of public hearings covering the same topics, but a lot of information was uncovered by the Royal Commission. The least they could have done is to look into it and then release a report as to whether the conduct found met any of the NAC's jurisdiction, and if not, then why not? The NAC has other complaints where they have made no corruption findings, and yet they are still preparing a report for release. And in other matters, where no prosecutions were recommended, they're also preparing reports. So I don't understand how something as critical as Robodebt didn't warrant the same treatment. We'll see what the inspector's views are, hopefully shortly.